Hi everyone, we bring to you Tech Talk by GSDC, where our expert guests dive into deeper conversations on many insightful topics. My name is Settle, and in this episode, we will be listening to the extended conversation of Dr. Jerry Zandstra and Miriam Taylor, where they continue their captivating discussion on the topic instructional designs in learning.
Now, what are the emerging trends really in instructional design, but as that relates to delivering through virtual reality and augmented reality? And what's your sort of overall overall predictions in that area?
Yeah, it amazes me that how much confusion of terminology. So just for clarity, augmented reality, I stay in my reality. There's layers of it over the top. So I'm looking through my iPad or I'm looking through a smartphone, and there are things that are layered over the top of it. That's augmented reality, hence the term. Virtual reality means I leave the reality that I'm in and I'm entering another reality. Requires different pieces of equipment. It requires different technology. Augmented reality, again, this is a wonderful augmented reality piece of equipment. So is a tablet. A laptop can be too. It's not always, so easy to walk around with. When you're in virtual reality, at least for now, you are wearing a complete set of goggles. I think augmented reality and virtual reality, let's just call it extended reality, which is both of those fit in that category. I think there are great uses for both of them. But I think virtual reality is far more limited, especially in large scale training, because if you have to train 5,000 people, that means you need 2,000 headsets. The headsets are $3,000 a piece. You have to buy them, store them, clean them, maintain them. I think there are instances when virtual reality makes an enormous amount of sense. When actual practice in the real world would be ridiculously deadly, dangerous.
Right. Yep.
I think at some point when VR, virtual reality, and AI, artificial intelligence, get merged, and it is adaptive, so that you can have I can picture salespeople training in a virtual reality thing where like I'm trying to sell you, and AI is actually responding to what I'm saying. But I think the vast majority in the learning, training, and development space is going to be augmented reality. You think of a factory floor where you can layer steps over the top of a machine so that it's really easy. I think there are times in medical situations where you can see exactly where veins are, or arteries, or tendons, or muscles, and you know exactly what to do with them. So I think that those two things are cool tools. They're shiny new things. AI is a shiny new thing, but I think, Miriam, knowing you well, you're going to like what I'm going to say next. All of it still has to be backed up by good instructional design and learning science.
Yeah.
The shiny new things can't eat the cognitive reality or load balancing, or our brains are still our brains. We learn in particular ways as human beings. These are awesome experiences, but they are still nothing but tools to be used in the service of human beings, and I think we need to, I think we need to think hard about that. So and again, and who knows what the next one is, right?
Right. Absolutely.
5 years ago, only a handful of people in the world were and artificial intelligence, it turns out, the theory of it goes back to the 30s, and there's people in the 50s that are writing, and 60s that are writing. But when it became like, it's a thing, that was literally a year ago. It's a thing that's accessible. So we'll see what comes next. Well, let's talk about storytelling. Let's move from the new tech to the old tech, right?
Right.
How do instructional designers use storytelling to create more immersive and engaging learning experiences, which I think great technology, bad story, or bad technology, great story. A book is terrible technology. Right? I mean, the Gutenberg wouldn't say so, but I mean, book is really old. that's my preference, because
Right.
I don't care so much about the delivery methodology. I want to hear the story. So how do you do that?
Yeah, these two questions do kind of go together, because to your point, when VR really works great is when there's an amazing story, right?
Mm.
And so, and that's why we have I have 3 teenagers, or just slightly past teenagers, who love their immersive worlds with their headsets and that kind of thing, or practicing their golf swing. I'm not sure if it's helped or not, but that's a very immersive world with compelling stories, right, that go along with it. But stories capture our attention, and I think especially in the world of training within an organization, oftentimes it's compliance, oftentimes it's a check the box, and so we already have low levels of motivation and engagement. And storytelling is really, whether it's explicitly stated, it's a powerful part of adult learning theory, because we're bringing our stories to the table. We want to, adult learning theory says we learn best from each other. Well, then let's do that by telling stories. So storytelling in learning speaks to capturing the learner's motivation and their engagement. But again, to our conversation about whether it's translation and localization or inclusivity or that kind of thing, if stories aren't relevant to who the learner is, then they've immediately checked out, because that story, or even just the story relevant to my position right now. Am I watching a scenario that, in 100 years I'll never be a part of, because that's not my role? Or so stories, to your point, can also be very almost immediately sort of shut down someone if they don't feel like they're part of that story and it doesn't have meaning
Immediately. Yeah.
Right.
And a good story gives you the feeling that you're in the room, right? And you're sort of, what's going to come next. A story that doesn't connect with you, and it's back to something I heard somebody say about training along. They said, I have the feeling I'm standing on the outside of the building looking in through a dirty window. This isn't for me. This isn't meant for me. Yeah. And I think a good storyteller, a good comedian, good book, good television series draws you into that, so that you can see yourself. But we're right back to learning science. We're right back to the way our brains are wired. Our brains are wired to listen to stories. And, because that's how we've communicated truth and value and meaning, not typically through propositional truth, but most of the time through, there was this farmer, right? And here's my grandpa, right? Or whatever, all that stuff. I think we're hardwired to do that. So now let's talk about gamification, because maybe that's the place where some of this lives best.
Right. Yeah. So, and you're gonna, you want to chime in here too, for sure. So, I think that it's important too. This is a soapbox I've been on for a long time, right? But when we talk about gamification, we are talking more about elements within a traditional sort of e-learning or learning situation, as opposed to like a true game. But when we do talk about gamifications, the latest techniques, I think, are somewhat similar, but things like having leaderboards, scores, rankings, badges, points. It's sort of that competitive. It really, there's various levels of motivation and types of motivation, and that's what gamification is trying to get at. But I think that it's important to think about also who, again, always going back to who your learner is, because I've also heard people say, I absolutely hate games. It's so cheesy. It's so like, I log in, I have to take this training, and I spend 10 minutes playing this dumb little game. And so again, it depends on your learner, but it also goes back. Go back to learning design, right? So if the purpose of that gamification technique is to improve my motivation or my retention. So if I have to play a game where I'm actually putting into practice some of these terms and that kind of thing, and I'm playing it over and over and over again, that's think about Duolingo or other apps that teach you languages. They're set up in a gamified way, but I'm constantly working on reviewing and speaking correctly. So I I think the gamification, I would say they keep coming further and further. There's so many authoring tools that now include right within them gamification tools. Same thing with your LMS. They include it right in there. And I think those are great. But as an instructional designer, you have to make sure you know who your audience is and think through the purpose of why you're using those tools, or you're going to end up just turning your audience off. So I think those are probably the most important things to think about with whatever gamification technique you're going to use.
Well, and there's a part to gamification that ties into our next topic as well, sort of the social learning, because there are, and back to inclusivity, there are certain cultures where one-on-one competition really is not highly motivating. If I can improve the station of others, right, and they're more collaborative, less acquisitive, less individualistic, less competitive, individually competitive. So how do we drag social learning into this? And are there certain platforms that create collaboration? I mean, I remember being on the first webinar. I was on a webinar with like 400 people. And all of a sudden they broke us into a room of 8 people with a list of questions. And I had never, it's been a while, but I had never seen that before. And all of a sudden it was like, I went from sponge giving half my attention, right? Sort of listening to, oh, okay, I have to do something here now. They're actually asking me to participate. I have to pay attention. What are some ways of doing that?
Yeah, so I think social learning, again, is it's just so interesting to me, because social learning was really like the very first form of learning ever, right? Back to our, we tell stories and we learn socially from each other.
Around the fire, right? We still do that. Yeah.
Right, absolutely. It's still a huge part of, and I just think, especially in e-learning, it was easy to get away from that just because of the necessity of people are spread out globally. Maybe the technology wasn't suited for it, or we've all had that bad experience maybe in a university class where we all had to respond on the discussion forum. And again, those can be very powerful, but the ones maybe we participated in weren't designed very well. And so we sort of get this bad taste. But I think we can actually thank the pandemic for sort of bringing forth again the reminder of we learn best when we learn together. So there's sort of this increase in this new buzzword of social learning, but I don't think it's anything that we don't already know. Like, it's really important to learn together. And so there's a lot of tools. I mean, obviously I already addressed the discussion forum or board. Now, some corporate LMS don't really contain that. Some do. The important part about all of it, right, is that it has to be used correctly. So I've seen it, a great way to use that socially is if you're doing scenario learning, or maybe you're doing some kind of project-based, everybody has a case study.
Problem solving.
Yep, exactly. And getting feedback from peers. But there's a lot of other tools now too, right? So maybe your, the system you're using isn't very powerful, but I've seen organizations just use social media, whether they create some kind of, like, it used to be a Facebook group or other tools like that, or maybe it's like a channel, that they're all communicating through, or something like Slack. There's we're not paid. What's the word?
Right, chat. It can be it can be Google Chat, or can be
Yeah, exactly. But those tools, and so if you're an instructional designer and you're looking to incorporate more of that, and your LMS doesn't have it, you may have to look outside of that system, which takes more. You need to communicate. You need to communicate the purpose too. Like, hey, we're going to do this work over here. You're going to take this course, but then learning is not a one-time event. And we hear this word a lot lately, nudges, right? What's your 30, 60, 90, 6 month? Are you giving nudges? Social learning is a great way to do that, is throw out at 30 days or 60. Here's a new scenario. What do you think about it? But let's talk about it together as a group in whatever tool we're using.
Yeah.
In your mind, what are some of the larger ethical considerations that we have today as instructional designers that we really need to keep in mind?
Yeah, depends on the technology. Part of it is AI, right? Who owns the intellectual property? Who owns the IP? that's going to get really thorny. People have a right to the things that they create. What happens to them? What happens when you are jointly creating from these large language libraries? So you came up with the idea, AI created it, who owns it? That's a bit of a lead. That certainly there's really thorny paths in legal to be considered, but there's also ethical considerations. But that the one that jumps to my mind really is global inclusion, and the reason why I think that is an ethical issue. And I think inclusion is an ethical issue, but for learning, I think it's an ethical issue because of the nature of the human person. People are worthy of dignity. They're worthy of being treated with respect, regardless of their culture, regardless of their history, regardless of their language. And I think it's very easy for people to think that picture a room with 8 people sitting in it, and they look very diverse. They have different accents, they maybe speak a little bit different languages and so on. And they are creating learning for a global organization, but they've never spoken with anybody in sub-Saharan Africa. They've never spoken with anybody in Central America or South America or any part of Asia. And so they look diverse, but they're all from the same culture, the same country. They're not in communication with, and so that idea of to me, inclusion means we actually seek this out. I seek to understand the learners, and it's right back to who are my learners. That's the very first thing that you said. I think it's beyond good practice. I think there's a moral obligation, an ethical obligation to find out who your learners are and do everything you can. Now, when you have 50,000 people learning, I get it. You have to create some personas, right, of people. You have to create some general tendencies. That's okay. It's an effort. You're making an effort at it. And so I think there's a moral imperative, an ethical imperative to work really hard to understand, and then to make that learning accessible in language, to understand colors and cultures and symbols and idioms and humor and stories and great, you've come up with this wonderful technology. They don't have access to it, right? That's wonderful that you've created this fantastic virtual reality experience. I don't have internet, right? I think that's one of the biggest ethical considerations, is ensuring that you understand your learners and you work really, really hard to connect with them. And then then there's some, there are some other ethical considerations as well. Things like, are you considering people as a means to an end or an end in themselves? Are you interested in moving the ball for the entire organization while simultaneously ensuring that they have been given opportunities to grow? Right. So, triple bottom line stuff. It can't just be the financial well-being of the company. You have to have the life well-being of the learner in mind. Those are not either or things. We're adults. We can handle complex ideas. And so holding on to multiple priorities, I think, is also a key ethical consideration.
Yeah, and I think that L&D departments often are in that unique position, right, to help speak into those because the work they do and the background that they have. So those are important considerations, and it often lands on those departments to bring those kinds of issues up and to make sure that they're at the forefront all the time.
Distinctly human and human resources and in the learning side. What about the future of work, implications of instructional design? What do you think there?
Yeah, I just think I know we already addressed this a little bit, but we've sort of seen this. It's been an interesting, I think, I don't know if you want to call it a sort of a pendulum swing back and forth, right? But prior to the pandemic, you had your learning and development team, often not seen as, or often not able to be proactive, often putting out fires or compliance training, and when possible, doing other things. And sort of this gradual implementation, especially of digital learning. And then we have the pandemic, and so there's this big emergency, and we understand the importance now. And then there is, budgets grew, and then they shrunk again. And so I say all that to say, if you are,
do you think budgets are shrinking now?
I think it depends on the company. In the United States, there's a recession, I guess I would say, depends on who you talk to at times. But I think that regardless, those years have sort of illustrated the fact that for a learning and development team, and then you throw AI into that, right? And so what's really important is that your COO, your CFO, your CEO understands that your team is not content creators, meaning they're not grinding out the sausage or whatever. That's probably an expression that doesn't make sense to a lot of people, but you're not just cranking out whatever comes to you, that you actually are designing learning experiences. So when I talk about the future of work, I think it's really critical that instructional designers, learning and development teams are able to articulate what they do, because otherwise it's pretty easy to say, hey, why don't we just use AI? I'll create some kind of a compliance training that AI wrote for me. And they don't understand, people that aren't in that world, and I understand why, they don't understand the importance of designing the learning again, and the importance of the learner and all of that.
Yeah.
And then I'd also say that, go ahead. You're good.
No, you're going to also say, and I don't want to cut that off.
Well, no, I just think two quick things, I guess. We already talked about use AI as an instructional designer. Don't be scared of it. Use it to give you a head start. Use it to give you a leg up. Use it to give you ideas. You're still the expert. And then lastly, we already addressed this too a little, but there's a real blending of, I think, HR and learning and development with issues of employee engagement, quiet quitting, all of those kinds of things. The L&D team is also uniquely poised to solve those problems, to create personalized learning pathways, to keep your employees engaged, to provide leadership training. So as an instructional designer, embrace that. Like, that is the future. That's your opportunity to really help grow the people in your company. And to me, that's very exciting. So I'd say those are kind of, in my mind, the three sort of future of work things that instructional designers need to be looking at.
Great. I don't know that it's ever been more exciting to be in L&D. I think part of it is technology. Part of it is the increasing globalized nature of the world that we're in, and the sheer number of companies that have a global footprint, the number of companies, even when they don't have a global footprint, that are recognizing there are many cultures represented inside my little company of 500 or 1,000 people. There's an enormous amount of diversity of language and so on. I think it's an exciting time to be in our industry, and I don't see it stagnating. I see the technology adding more, and interconnectivity adding more, and things like AR and AI, somewhat VR, really changing how we do it. And I think, to your point, hang on to the basics of solid cognitive science, learning science, instructional design. Use the tools, don't be afraid of them, and look for ways of communicating the value that you bring to the organization that you're part of. I think those are things that I'm kind of summarizing you. I have no original thoughts. I'm just parroting.
Yeah, that's not true at all.
And so I just, but I think those are three things we can walk away with. Stick to the basics of how human beings think and learn. Apply the tools where they fit, and look to communicate your values. So with that, we will end. Miriam, thank you for your time, and GSDC, thank you for the opportunity. These are just the conversations Miriam and I have all the time. We're just happy that you could sit in and listen in on them. And we hope this has been useful to you. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode. We will be bringing you even more exciting conversations soon, only on Tech Talk by GSDC.